A rancher hired a veiled Apache woman. When the wind revealed her, he was paralyzed. The sun had just begun to rise over the dusty plains, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. The ranch lay quiet, the only sounds being the gentle rustle of the wind through the tall grass and the occasional call of a distant bird. The rancher, a tall man with broad shoulders and hands hardened by years of labor, was already up, tending to the morning chores. His name was Thomas, and he had spent most of his life working this land. The ranch had been in his family for generations, but recent hardships had made it hard for him to keep everything running smoothly. Several of his workers had left, drawn away by opportunities in the nearby towns or simply unable to endure the harsh life on the ranch. Thomas had grown used to the solitude, but it was a heavy kind of loneliness. He was a man who appreciated hard work, honesty, and reliability, but he also knew that the ranch could not survive on his strength alone. He needed help, and he needed it soon. That was why, on this particular morning, when a figure appeared on the horizon, walking steadily toward the ranch house, he felt a mixture of curiosity and caution. The woman who approached was unlike anyone Thomas had ever seen. She moved with a quiet confidence, her steps measured, yet purposeful. A veil covered her face, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze, hiding her expression but not her presence. Her clothing was simple, practical for work, yet there was an elegance in the way she carried herself, a grace that seemed natural and unforced. Thomas watched from a distance, his brow furrowed, trying to understand who she might be and what had brought her to this remote ranch. When she reached the gate, she stopped and gave a small nod, as if acknowledging Thomas even before they had exchanged words. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dry earth, and greeted her with a careful, measured tone. "Good morning. I don't believe we've met." "Can I help you?" The woman's voice was soft, but it carried a quiet strength. "I am looking for work, sir. I can do many tasks on a ranch. I am willing to work hard." Her words were simple, direct, and honest. Thomas studied her for a moment, noting the way her eyes, dark, observant, and steady, met his gaze. There was a history in those eyes, a story that she did not tell, but it was clear that she had endured much. "Work is hard here," Thomas said cautiously. "It's not just heavy labor, it's long days, unpredictable weather, and little comfort. Why would you come here?" The woman lowered her gaze briefly, then lifted it again with the same calm resolve. "Because I am capable, because I wish to work, and because I choose my own path." There was a quiet defiance in her words, a certainty that made Thomas pause. He had heard many promises from travelers and wanderers seeking work, but few had the quiet confidence that this woman displayed. After a moment's consideration, Thomas nodded. "Very well, you can start today. I'll show you the ranch and the work that needs to be done, but I must warn you, it will not be easy." The woman inclined her head slightly, accepting the warning without hesitation. Together they walked toward the main house, Thomas explaining the tasks that lay ahead. She listened attentively, asking questions only when necessary, her movements careful and precise. As they passed the stables, the pens, and the wide-open fields, Thomas could not help but notice how naturally she seemed to move within the space, almost as if she had grown up on land like this, even though he knew nothing of her past. As the morning unfolded, she began to prove herself immediately. She fed the animals with a patience that Thomas admired, her hands firm yet gentle. She helped mend fences and clean the stables, showing a surprising amount of skill and strength for someone he had not yet fully known. Thomas watched her work, his curiosity growing alongside his respect. There was a rhythm to her movements, a quiet efficiency that made the chores seem almost effortless. By mid-morning, Thomas realized that he had not felt this relieved or hopeful in a long time. Perhaps, he thought, this woman could be the help the ranch so desperately needed. Yet he could not shake the sense of mystery that surrounded her. Her veil, which she never lifted, hid her face and her expression, making it difficult to read her emotions. Was she wary of strangers, protective of herself, or was it something else entirely? The townspeople, Thomas knew, would likely be just as intrigued. She was not like anyone they had seen before. There were whispers even now, as some farmers and travelers passed by on their way to town, casting glances toward the ranch. They noticed the unusual figure, her veil moving gently in the wind, and wondered about her story. Thomas had no answers, and she offered none. Despite the questions that lingered, the work continued. Thomas found himself observing her more closely, noticing small details, the steadiness of her hands, the careful way she measured each task, the slight smile that sometimes appeared when a task was done well. There was a quiet dignity about her, a sense of purpose that seemed rooted in a history far deeper than the ranch itself. As the day wore on, the wind picked up, carrying the scents of the plains and the distant mountains. It tugged at the edges of her veil, and Thomas found his gaze drawn again and again to her. He was aware, perhaps for the first time in years, of being unsettled in a way that was both disconcerting and strangely compelling. She was a mystery, yes, but also a presence that demanded attention, respect, and perhaps even admiration. By late afternoon, they had finished most of the day's work. Thomas felt a sense of satisfaction he had not known for months. The ranch was in order, the animals fed, the fences mended. And through it all, the woman had moved through the tasks with a quiet strength, never asking for praise, never boasting, simply performing the work as if it were second nature. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Thomas finally spoke, breaking the silence that had stretched between them all day. "You've done well today. I wasn't sure at first if you could handle it, but I was wrong. You've proven yourself." The woman nodded in acknowledgement, her eyes meeting his briefly. There was no smile, no celebration, just a calm acceptance of his words. Yet in that simple gesture, Thomas felt a connection, subtle but undeniable. He did not know her story, her past, or the reasons that had brought her to this isolated ranch. But he sensed that she carried with her a strength that could not be measured by work alone, a strength born of experience, survival, and perhaps secrets yet to be revealed. As night fell, Thomas found himself thinking about the woman long after the chores were done. He wondered who she really was, where she had come from, and what stories lay hidden behind the veil she never removed. He realized with a mixture of awe and unease that he had just met someone extraordinary, someone who might change the rhythm of his life and the life of the ranch in ways he could not yet imagine. And so, under the vast, star-filled sky, the ranch settled into quiet. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying with it the faint rustle of the veil, as if hinting at the mysteries and revelations that were yet to come. Thomas knew one thing for certain. The arrival of this veiled woman marked the beginning of a story far larger than the day's work, a story that would unfold slowly, with moments of wonder, tension, and discovery, in the days, months, and perhaps years ahead. By the time the first stars glimmered in the night sky, Thomas felt a strange mix of curiosity and anticipation. He did not yet understand the depth of the journey that had begun, but he knew that the presence of this mysterious woman had awakened something long dormant within him, the recognition that life could still surprise, challenge, and transform him, even in the quietest corners of the world. And with that thought, Thomas closed the barn door, unaware that the wind, the veil, and the secrets of the woman he had just hired would soon become a turning point in his life, a moment he would never forget. The next morning, the ranch awoke to the familiar sounds of the land. The soft lowing of cattle, the rhythmic creak of the windmill, and the distant crow of a rooster all blended into the beginning of another long day. Thomas rose early, as was his habit, but this time he felt a flicker of anticipation. The veiled woman had proven herself the day before, handling the work with skill and quiet confidence. He wondered what more he might learn about her, though he knew she would reveal little willingly. She was already at the stables when he arrived. The sun had just begun to climb, brushing golden light across the wide fields. She moved gracefully among the horses, checking each one with care. Thomas observed from the doorway, noting the way she handled each animal. There was no fear in her movements, no hesitation, only a calm assurance that seemed to belong to someone who understood the ways of the land instinctively. Thomas cleared his throat. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." The woman looked up briefly, her eyes meeting his. "I slept enough. I am ready to begin," she said softly. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying a quiet strength that made Thomas respect her even more. He approached, holding the list of tasks for the day. "There is work to be done in the north field. Some fences need mending and a few gates have been damaged. The horses need water and the cattle must be checked for injuries. You can start there and I will handle the barns and supplies." She nodded, taking the directions in stride. Without a word of complaint, she set off toward the north field, her movements smooth and efficient. Thomas watched her go, impressed not only by her competence, but also by the way she seemed completely at ease in her surroundings. As the day progressed, she worked with tireless energy. Thomas, moving among the barns and storage sheds, could not help but glance toward her frequently. She seemed unbothered by the long hours or the sun beating down on the land. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and confident. Thomas realized that she was more than just a capable worker. She had a presence that demanded attention, a quiet authority that made others take notice even without words. Some of the neighboring ranchers passed by, curious to see the new worker. They rode up on their horses, tipping their hats in greeting. "Morning, Thomas. Who's your new helper?" one of them asked. Thomas hesitated briefly. "She's someone who can manage a ranch." "She's very capable." The ranchers exchanged puzzled looks. "Never seen her before. She's different," one said. "Where is she from?" Thomas shrugged. "I don't know much. She keeps to herself and I haven't asked. But she's strong and skilled, that's all I know." "That's enough for me." The ranchers nodded, though their curiosity lingered. Even from a distance, they could see that she was not an ordinary worker. There was something in her posture, the way she moved, and the intensity of her gaze that spoke of experiences and challenges beyond their understanding. By mid-morning, Thomas noticed a small habit of hers, how she would pause occasionally, lifting her head to look at the horizon as if listening to something far away. At first, he thought it was a moment of rest, but the more he watched, the more he realized that she seemed attuned to the land itself. The way the wind shifted, the subtle sounds of animals, even the faint scent of rain or change in the soil, all of it seemed to register with her in a way that went beyond simple observation. She was aware of everything, and it gave her an almost uncanny presence on the ranch. During a brief break, Thomas approached her as she sat near the fence, taking a moment to catch her breath. "I have to ask," he said carefully, "you move and work as if you know this land already. Have you lived on a ranch before?" She shook her head slightly. "Not exactly. But I have learned to live with the land, to listen to it, to respect it. Life teaches you to understand what is around you if you pay attention." Her words were simple, but Thomas felt their depth. There was wisdom in her voice, the kind that comes from facing challenges and surviving difficult circumstances. Thomas felt a strange mix of admiration and curiosity. He realized he had been alone for so long, handling everything himself, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to encounter someone whose presence could both inspire and challenge him. This woman, with her veil and quiet strength, had awakened something he had not expected, an interest not only in her skills, but also in the story she carried with her. The afternoon brought a sudden gust of wind, sweeping across the fields and carrying dust and leaves in its path. Thomas watched as the edge of her veil lifted slightly in the breeze. He quickly looked away, realizing that even the smallest glimpse of her face made him feel unexpectedly unsettled. There was something captivating about her, something that went beyond beauty or skill. It was a presence that demanded respect and, in a way, awe. She noticed nothing, focused entirely on her work, repairing a broken gate with steady hands. But Thomas could not stop thinking about her, wondering who she really was and what had brought her to this remote ranch. He had seen many people in his life, travelers, workers, and wanderers, but few had carried themselves with such quiet confidence and mystery. As the day wore on, he began to notice how the townspeople subtly reacted to her. Children passing by on errands would pause and stare, their curiosity evident. Adults whispered to one another, trying to guess her background or the reasons for her veil. Thomas could hear fragments of their conversations, speculation about where she came from, why she hid her face, and what her story might be. Yet none of it seemed to reach her. She moved through her work as if the world around her was only a background to her own focus and purpose. By late afternoon, Thomas decided to take a short walk across the property, keeping an eye on her from a distance. As he observed her, he realized how much she had already begun to change the atmosphere of the ranch. There was a quiet energy now, a sense of order and competence that had been missing for months. Even the animals seemed to respond to her presence, calm and attentive under her care. Thomas felt a growing sense of respect, and even something more profound, an acknowledgement that this woman, who remained largely silent and veiled, carried with her a wisdom and resilience that went far beyond what he had imagined. She was more than a worker. She was a force that commanded attention, not through words or authority, but simply through her being. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows over the fields, Thomas approached her once more. "The work is done for today," he said. "You've done very well. I don't know your story, and perhaps I may never, but I can see your strength and skill. That is enough for me to trust you." She looked up at him, meeting his gaze briefly. "Thank you. I only do what must be done." Her words were calm, simple, yet they carried an unmistakable weight. Thomas nodded, feeling both admiration and a sense of wonder. He had encountered many people in his life, but few had left such a strong impression without speaking much at all. There was a quiet dignity about her, a sense of self-possession that was rare in anyone, especially in a place like this, where life was hard and survival often depended on toughness and grit rather than grace and subtle strength. As the evening approached, Thomas returned to the house, his mind filled with thoughts of the veiled woman. He realized that the ranch had changed in a single day. The wind had brought more than just dust and leaves. It had carried a new presence, a new energy that had shifted everything. He could not predict what the future held, nor could he anticipate the challenges and revelations that would come. But one thing was certain. This woman, mysterious and skilled, had already begun to shape the story of the ranch, and perhaps even his own life, in ways he had never expected. That night, as the wind howled softly outside the windows, Thomas found himself reflecting on the day. He thought of the quiet strength in her eyes, the precision in her movements, and the way she seemed to understand the land as if it were a living companion. He wondered about the stories hidden behind her veil, the experiences that had shaped her, and the reasons she had come to this isolated place. He felt a mixture of curiosity, respect, and a growing sense of anticipation. The woman had arrived quietly, without fanfare or explanation, and yet she had already begun to leave an indelible mark on the ranch, on its rhythm, and on Thomas himself. He realized that her presence was more than a help with chores. It was a reminder that life was full of mysteries, challenges, and people who could inspire and transform even the most solitary of lives. As Thomas extinguished the lantern and prepared for bed, he knew that the coming days would reveal more. There would be questions, challenges, and perhaps even revelations that would test both the woman and himself. But for now, he felt a sense of calm and hope he had not known in a long time. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, now held the promise of change, growth, and discovery. And somewhere in the wind that swept across the plains, the faint rustle of her veil whispered of stories yet untold, of a past that remained hidden, and of a connection that was only beginning to form, one that would shape the lives of both the rancher and the veiled woman in ways neither could yet imagine. The next morning, the ranch awoke to the gentle warmth of the sun, stretching across the wide fields like a golden blanket. Thomas rose early as always, carrying the quiet rhythm of his daily chores. But today, there was something different in the air. The wind had picked up overnight, swirling across the plains, rustling the tall grasses and sending dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Thomas could feel the energy of the day before even in the breeze, a subtle reminder of the veiled woman's presence and the quiet strength she had brought to the ranch. She was already at work when he stepped outside. The early light caught the edge of her veil, making it shimmer softly in the wind. She was checking the fences along the northern boundary, her movements calm yet purposeful, every step measured and confident. Thomas watched her for a moment, noticing the way she moved, the careful attention she gave to each post and rail, and the ease with which she handled the physical demands of the task. It was clear that she was not only strong but also deeply attuned to the land around her, almost as if she could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. Thomas approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Morning," he said softly. "The wind is stronger today. Be careful near the edges of the field." She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. "I am aware," she replied simply, her voice calm yet firm. "The wind is part of the land. It teaches as much as it challenges." Her words struck him. There was a wisdom in her voice, a depth of understanding that went beyond the tasks at hand. Thomas realized that he had not only hired a skilled worker, but someone who understood the land and its rhythms in a way he had never seen before. He felt a mixture of admiration and curiosity, though he knew better than to ask too many questions. She revealed only what she wished to reveal, and Thomas had learned that patience was necessary. The wind grew stronger as the morning progressed, carrying with it the scents of the plains, the distant mountains, and the river that ran near the edge of the property. Thomas continued his own work, but his attention kept drifting toward her. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, her veil fluttering in the wind, hiding her face yet somehow drawing his focus. He felt a strange combination of respect, fascination, and an unfamiliar tension that made him keenly aware of her presence at all times. By mid-morning, he noticed the wind catching her veil more forcefully. It lifted slightly, revealing glimpses of her hair, dark and smooth, but she did not notice. Thomas's heart began to race subtly, though he tried to remain composed. He realized that the veil had been a shield, a barrier that protected her identity and her emotions. And now, the wind was gently peeling that barrier away, even if only for a moment. He forced himself to look away, returning to his own chores, yet he could not escape the image of her partially revealed face. There was something striking about the glimpse he had caught, a beauty that was both strong and delicate, mysterious yet familiar in a way he could not place. He felt a pang of awe, and he realized something closer to wonder. It was as if the land itself had conspired to reveal this secret to him, to show him a side of her that had been hidden until the perfect moment. Hours passed, and the wind continued its gentle teasing, lifting the veil now and then. Thomas noticed the effect it had not only on him, but on the other animals and workers on the ranch. The horses were calm, moving smoothly along their paths, while the cattle remained steady and attentive. It was as if the woman's presence, combined with the wind, created a harmony that Thomas had never experienced before. He realized that she had a quiet power, one that did not need words or authority to command respect and attention. During a brief pause for water, Thomas approached her once again. She was adjusting a fence post, sweat glistening on her forehead despite the morning chill. "You handle the wind well," he remarked. "It can be tricky, especially when it shifts suddenly." She looked at him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "The wind is not the enemy. It is a teacher. It reveals what we need to see if we are willing to notice." Thomas felt a chill run through him. Her words carried a weight he could not ignore. He realized with a mix of fear and excitement that the wind was indeed revealing something, not just the physical veil, but a part of her that had remained hidden. He wondered what other secrets she held, and whether he was prepared to face them. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Thomas moved toward the field where she worked, carrying some tools that would be needed for the repairs. The wind had grown stronger, whipping across the plains, and Thomas could see the veil lifting more noticeably now. He stopped in his tracks, momentarily paralyzed, as the wind pulled the fabric back just enough to reveal her face fully for the first time. Thomas's breath caught. He had imagined her face countless times, wondered about the features hidden behind the veil, but the reality was far beyond anything he could have pictured. Her eyes were deep and dark, filled with intelligence, courage, and a quiet sadness. Her cheekbones were high and graceful, and the curve of her lips suggested both strength and kindness. There was a fire in her expression, subtle but undeniable, that spoke of endurance, resilience, and experience beyond her years. For a long moment, Thomas could not move or speak. He was paralyzed by the sheer presence of her revealed face, overwhelmed by the intensity and beauty that radiated from her. The wind swirled around them, carrying dust and leaves, yet in that moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. The ranch, the animals, the distant mountains, all were forgotten as he simply stared, unable to take in more than the image of the woman before him. Finally, she noticed his gaze. She did not react with anger or surprise. Instead, she maintained a calm, steady demeanor, as if this moment had been expected. She adjusted the veil slightly, but it was too late. Her face had been seen, revealed in full by the wind that had whispered secrets across the plains. Thomas slowly gathered himself, taking a step forward. I didn't expect," his words trailed off. He struggled to articulate the mixture of awe, admiration, and disbelief he felt. She simply nodded, understanding more than he could express. "You see me as I am," she said softly, her voice carrying over the wind. "But you must remember, there is more to a person than what is revealed at first glance." Thomas swallowed hard, realizing the truth in her words. The veil had hidden more than her face. It had shielded her past, her experiences, and the depth of her strength. And now, even with the veil lifted, he understood that he had only glimpsed a fraction of who she truly was. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a quiet rhythm, both of them continuing their work, but now with a new awareness of each other. Thomas felt a shift in their relationship. The revelation of her face had not diminished the mystery. Instead, it had deepened it. He felt drawn to her in a way that went beyond curiosity or admiration. There was a connection forming, subtle and unspoken, built on respect, understanding, and the acknowledgement of shared purpose on the ranch. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Thomas could not help but reflect on the moment. The wind had revealed her to him, but it had also revealed something within himself, a recognition of beauty, strength, and resilience in a person who had chosen to reveal only what she wished. He realized that he was witnessing not just the unveiling of a face, but the unveiling of character, courage, and a life shaped by trials, choices, and survival. The woman, sensing his thoughts, gave a small nod. "The land teaches patience," she said quietly. "It teaches observation. It reveals slowly when the time is right. The wind only helps along the way." Thomas smiled faintly, understanding that he had been given a rare gift, the chance to see a part of her world that few would ever witness. He knew that there was more to learn, more to uncover, and that the days ahead would reveal even deeper truths about the woman, the land, and perhaps even about himself. As night fell, the wind continued to whisper across the plains, carrying the faint rustle of her veil, now folded carefully on her shoulder. Thomas watched her from the doorway of the barn, realizing that life on the ranch would never be the same again. She had arrived quietly, with no fanfare or explanation, and yet in a single afternoon she had shifted the balance of his world. The veil was lifted, but the mystery remained, and Thomas knew that the journey of understanding her and the journey of understanding himself was only beginning. That night, under the star-filled sky, Thomas lay awake thinking of her. He reflected on the strength and dignity revealed in her eyes, the quiet courage she had shown, and the moment when the wind had unveiled her face. It was a moment that would stay with him forever, a moment that had changed his perception of life, work, and human connection. And somewhere in the rustling wind, carrying the sense of the plains and the promise of tomorrow, the woman's presence lingered, not just as a worker on the ranch, but as a force of nature in her own right, a living reminder that strength, beauty, and mystery could be revealed in the quietest, simplest moments, if one only paid attention. The next morning, the ranch woke to a soft, golden light, filtered through the early fog that clung to the plains. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the faint scent of dew, wildflowers, and the distant river. Thomas rose early as always, moving quietly through the house to avoid disturbing the peaceful stillness. He had grown accustomed to the routine, but his thoughts lingered on the veiled woman. Her presence had changed the rhythm of his life, and the memory of her face, revealed by the wind the day before, lingered in his mind like a quiet melody he could not forget. She was already at the stables, moving with her usual grace and focus. Thomas watched her work for a moment, noticing the way she treated each animal with care and patience. There was a rhythm to her movements, a quiet power that made everything seem easier. Even the horses, usually restless in the morning, moved calmly around her, as if recognizing her as someone who belonged to the land in a way few others could. Thomas approached slowly, carrying a small bundle of supplies. He had watched her for days, admiring her strength and skill, but now he felt the desire to know more about her story. He hesitated, unsure of how to ask without overstepping, but finally spoke. "Yesterday, when the wind lifted your veil, I saw your face. I realize I don't know anything about you, where you come from, why you are here. If you are willing, I would like to know your story." She paused, looking up at him. For a moment there was only silence. Then, with a quiet resolve, she nodded. "I will tell you some of it," she said softly, "but not all. Some parts are mine alone. They do not belong to anyone else." Thomas nodded, respecting her boundaries. "I understand. Only what you choose to share is enough." She motioned for him to sit on a nearby log, and they both took a seat. The wind blew gently across the plains, carrying dust, leaves, and the faint scent of wildflowers. She began slowly, carefully choosing her words. "I was born in a small village far from here," she began. "My people lived close to the land, understanding its rhythms, learning from the rivers, the mountains, and the animals. Life was simple, but it was not easy. There were hardships, dangers, and struggles that taught us to survive, to be strong, and to protect one another." Thomas listened intently, sensing the depth behind her calm voice. "I have heard that your people are proud and resilient," he said quietly. "It must have been difficult to leave that life behind." She nodded. "It was. I lost family, friends, and everything familiar. I carried grief, but also knowledge of survival, of endurance, of respect for life and land. I came here not to forget, but to find a place where I could continue, where my skills and strength could be used without fear or judgment." Thomas could see the pain in her eyes, subtle but unmistakable. There was a quiet sadness there, a shadow of the hardships she had endured. But alongside that sadness was a fire, a determination that had brought her to his ranch. He felt a profound respect for her, realizing that the woman he had hired was far more than he had ever imagined. She had survived, adapted, and now stood before him as someone both strong and wise. "Your strength is remarkable," Thomas said quietly. "I see it in everything you do, the work, the care for the animals, the way you move across the land. It is not just physical, it is something deeper." She looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "Strength is learned. It is earned through experience. Life teaches whether we want it to or not. We carry what we learn and it shapes who we become." Thomas felt a deep connection forming in that moment, a bond built not on words alone, but on understanding, respect, and shared experience. He realized that he had been alone for so long, handling everything himself, that he had almost forgotten what it meant to meet someone whose presence could teach him, challenge him, and inspire him all at once. As the morning turned to afternoon, they worked side by side in the fields. She showed him subtle ways to handle the horses, the cattle, and even the stubborn soil, teaching through example rather than instruction. Thomas realized that her past experiences had given her knowledge beyond ordinary skill. She moved with intuition, anticipating problems before they arose, and finding solutions with patience and precision. During a short break, Thomas asked her about the veil. "You have carried it for a long time," he said cautiously. "Is it only for protection, or does it mean something more?" She considered his question carefully before answering. "The veil is both protection and a statement. It hides what must be hidden, but it also reminds others and myself of who I am and where I come from. It is not only about hiding, it is about choice, about preserving dignity and identity." Thomas nodded, understanding more than he could say. He realized that the veil had been a symbol of her past, her hardships, and her strength. Its presence, and now its occasional lifting by the wind, was a powerful reminder of the balance between mystery and revelation, strength and vulnerability. As the day wore on, Thomas noticed the way she interacted with the animals. She seemed to understand their fears, their moods, and their needs, treating each one with respect and patience. He realized that her strength was not just in her ability to work hard, but in her capacity to observe, understand, and adapt. This was a woman who carried the wisdom of experience, the resilience of survival, and the grace of someone who had learned to navigate the challenges of life without losing herself. By evening, the ranch had taken on a new rhythm. The fences were repaired, the animals fed and watered, and the fields were organized with careful attention. Thomas felt a sense of relief and satisfaction he had not known in months. But more than that, he felt a growing admiration for the woman who had come quietly into his life and transformed the ranch in a single day. As they rested near the barn, watching the sun dip behind the distant hills, Thomas spoke again. "I am grateful for you. Not just for the work you do, but for who you are. I see strength, wisdom, and courage in you, qualities that are rare and precious." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "I have learned to survive," she said softly, "to endure, to respect life. That is all any of us can do, but I appreciate your words. It is good to be seen, not just for what one does, but for who one is." Thomas realized then that the bond between them was deepening. It was not love, not yet, but something equally powerful, a recognition of shared respect, understanding, and mutual acknowledgement of the struggles each had faced. He felt that the ranch, once a place of solitude and hard labor, had become a space of connection, learning, and quiet transformation. As night fell, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint rustle of the veil that now rested on her shoulder. Thomas watched her work quietly in the fading light, realizing that her presence was more than a help with chores. It was a lesson in resilience, patience, and dignity. The ranch had changed, but so had he. He understood that her past, though painful and difficult, had shaped her into someone extraordinary, someone who could teach him about life, strength, and respect in ways he had never imagined. That night, Thomas lay awake under the star-filled sky, thinking about the stories she had shared, the strength she displayed, and the quiet power of her presence. He realized that her journey had not ended with her arrival at the ranch. It had only begun. And he, too, was on a journey of understanding, of connection, and perhaps of transformation. Somewhere in the gentle rustle of the wind, he sensed the whispers of her past, the lessons carried across the plains, and the promise of a future shaped by resilience, courage, and shared purpose. Thomas knew that the days ahead would bring challenges, revelations, and moments of discovery, but he felt ready. With her by his side, he sensed that the ranch, the land, and even his own life would never be the same again. And as the stars blinked softly above, the woman's presence remained, a reminder that strength, wisdom, and dignity were often hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. She had shared part of her story, but much remained untold, a quiet mystery that would continue to unfold, shaping the lives of both the rancher and the woman in ways that neither could yet imagine. The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the ranch continued to settle into a new pattern. The veiled woman, whose name Thomas had learned was Ayanna, had become an integral part of life on the land. Her presence was no longer simply that of a hired worker. She had grown into someone whose skills, wisdom, and calm strength shaped the ranch itself. Thomas often found himself watching her quietly, amazed at the way she seemed to move through the world with both purpose and ease. The townspeople had begun to take notice as well. At first, there had been curiosity, whispers, and speculation about the mysterious woman with the veil. But over time, their wonder shifted into respect. They saw how the ranch thrived under her care, how the animals responded to her, and how even Thomas seemed transformed by her presence. Children would sometimes linger at the edge of the fields, watching her work with fascination, while adults nodded quietly in approval, acknowledging her skill without needing to speak it aloud. One afternoon, as Thomas repaired a fence along the western boundary, Ayanna approached carrying a small bundle of supplies. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. She moved toward him, her steps deliberate and calm, and he noticed the slight wind rustling the edge of her veil. It no longer felt mysterious or threatening. Instead, it seemed natural, part of the way she existed in the world. "You've done well today," Thomas said quietly, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. "The cattle are calm, the fence is secure, and the fields in order. I can't remember the last time everything ran so smoothly." Ayanna nodded, placing the bundle down carefully. "The land responds to care, patience, and understanding," she replied softly. "You have worked hard, and the animals and earth notice that. That is why things run smoothly." Thomas looked at her, realizing once more how much she had taught him, not just about ranching, but about observation, respect, and the value of patience. He felt a deep admiration for her, one that went beyond skill. She had endured hardships, faced loss, and survived challenges he could hardly imagine, yet she moved through life with grace and quiet authority. As the sun dipped lower, they continued their work side by side. The breeze picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of grass, wildflowers, and the distant river. Thomas noticed how naturally Ayanna seemed to respond to the wind, adjusting her movements and balance almost instinctively. It was as if she were in constant conversation with the land itself, listening, adapting, and guiding without effort. He marveled at her connection to the world around her. Over the following days, Thomas learned more about her past. Ayanna spoke in fragments, never revealing everything at once, but enough to understand the strength and resilience she carried. She told him of her childhood in a village surrounded by nature, of the hardships her people faced, and of the lessons she had learned from survival, courage, and respect for life. Each story was a glimpse into a life shaped by both beauty and sorrow, and Thomas felt privileged to hear even these small pieces. Despite the hardships she had endured, there was no bitterness in her voice, only wisdom and acceptance. Thomas realized that this was what made her extraordinary. She had faced trials that would have broken many people, yet she emerged not only intact but stronger, able to bring her strength, insight, and compassion to those around her. The ranch, once a place of toil and solitude, had transformed into a space of growth, learning, and quiet wonder. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on a hill overlooking the ranch. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink, the last rays of sunlight spilling across the land. The wind moved gently, lifting her veil slightly and revealing her face in a way that made Thomas pause. There was a serene beauty in her expression, a combination of strength, wisdom, and calm determination that left him speechless. "I see now," Thomas said quietly, "that the ranch is not just running better because of work. It is running better because of you, because of the way you see the land, the animals, and life itself." Yana looked at him, her dark eyes steady and reflective. "The land teaches those who listen. You have listened, and that is why it responds. I do not change the land. I help it reveal what is already there." Thomas felt a deep respect and gratitude for her. He understood that her presence was more than just help. It was guidance, inspiration, and a living example of resilience. He realized that life on the ranch had changed in ways he could never have anticipated. He had begun to see the land not merely as property to manage, but as a living system to respect, nurture, and understand. And Ayana had been the teacher who revealed this truth to him. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. They worked, observed, and shared moments of quiet conversation, yet there was always an unspoken understanding between them. It was a connection built not on words alone, but on respect, admiration, and recognition of the experiences that had shaped each of them. Thomas had learned to appreciate patience, observation, and humility, while Ayana had found a place where her skills, wisdom, and strength were valued without question. As the seasons changed, so too did the ranch. Crops flourished under careful attention, animals thrived, and even the townspeople began to treat the land and its caretakers with new respect. Ayana's presence had brought more than skill. It had brought life, harmony, and a renewed sense of purpose. Thomas often reflected on the moment the wind had revealed her face for the first time. It had been a moment of awe, curiosity, and even fear, yet it had opened the door to understanding, connection, and transformation. One late afternoon, a neighboring rancher approached, observing the land with careful eyes. "I don't know what you've done differently, Thomas," he said quietly, "but your ranch has changed. The animals, the fields, they all seem to respond differently. Whatever your secret is, it is working." Thomas smiled faintly, glancing at Ayana, who was tending the animals nearby. "It is not just one person," he said. "It is the work, respect, and care that we give. Some things cannot be forced. They must be understood, nurtured, and allowed to grow naturally." The rancher nodded, clearly impressed. "Well, whoever that woman is, she has made a difference. I've never seen someone work with such skill and calm. There is something remarkable about her." Thomas did not answer immediately, but his thoughts were clear. It was not only her skill that was remarkable, it was her presence, her wisdom, and her strength. She had transformed not just the ranch, but the way he perceived the world around him. Life on the plains was hard, unforgiving, and unpredictable, yet through her guidance and example, it had become something richer, fuller, and more meaningful. As the sun began to set, Thomas and Ayana sat together near the barn, watching the sky turn from gold to pink, then to deep blue. The wind moved gently, carrying the soft rustle of her veil, now a familiar part of the landscape. Thomas realized that her presence had become inseparable from the land itself, an integral part of the ranch, its life, and its future. "You have changed this place," Thomas said quietly, "and you have changed me. I did not expect that when you arrived." Yana looked at him, her gaze steady and calm. "Change comes slowly," she said softly. "It comes through patience, observation, and understanding. The land, the people, and even life itself reveal their truths when we listen and respect them. You have learned to listen." Thomas nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had learned not only the value of hard work, but also the importance of patience, observation, and understanding. He realized that the true legacy of the ranch would not be measured in crops, fences, or animals, but in the respect, care, and harmony that had been nurtured here. And much of that legacy had come from the woman who had arrived quietly, veiled, and mysterious, yet had changed everything simply by being herself. As night fell, the stars filled the sky, shining over the plains and reflecting in the calm waters of the river nearby. The ranch was quiet, but alive in a way it had never been before. Thomas felt a sense of peace and accomplishment, knowing that the land, the animals, and the people were in harmony. And in the quiet moments, he thought of Ayana, not just as a worker or companion, but as a teacher, a guide, and a force of nature who had reshaped his understanding of life, work, and connection. The wind whispered softly across the plains, lifting her veil slightly as she moved, revealing glimpses of the strength, dignity, and wisdom in her expression. Thomas realized that her presence, her story, and her choices would leave a lasting mark, not only on the ranch, but on everyone who encountered her. She was a living reminder that true strength and beauty are often hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed, and that respect, understanding, and patience can transform even the most ordinary life into something extraordinary. And so, the ranch continued to thrive, carrying with it the lessons, wisdom, and presence of the veiled woman who had arrived quietly but had changed everything. Thomas knew that the story of her arrival, the moment the wind revealed her face, and the days that followed would remain with him forever. It was a story of courage, resilience, respect, and the quiet power of someone who lived with dignity and strength, shaping the world around her simply by being who she was. The land was alive, the animals content, and the rancher transformed. And in the gentle rustle of the wind, carrying the faint whisper of her veil, Thomas understood a truth he would never forget. The moments of revelation, patience, and respect are the ones that shape our lives most profoundly, and sometimes all it takes is one extraordinary person to teach us how to see them.